Transformation is the hardest challenge a leader will ever encounter, and it's a more pervasive challenge than ever before. More than 2/3 of executives that we surveyed told us they need to fundamentally transform their business in the next 3 to 5 years. That means not just doing what they're currently doing better, faster, or cheaper, but changing in form or substance. We were curious, who has done this well and what can we learn from it? Evan, how did we answer that question?
Well, we set out to create a new business rankings that we call the Transformation 10. Most rankings follow companies by their revenue or a subjective assessment of how innovative they are. But we've never really had a rankings that measure change over time. And this is a list that tries to measure what are the 10 most impactful transformations in the business world over the past 10 years. And we wanted to create an objective way to measure that. So the primary metric is the percent of revenue that is in new growth areas.
Which is not the easiest thing to track, right? So it took a little bit of forensic work from our consulting team to go out and figure out who really had done this, who had gone out there and pushed boundaries and brought their business into new markets, serving new customers, getting new jobs to be done. But that is what is critical to go and create the next version of yourself.
That's right, and we scanned almost 1,000 companies, the S&P 500, the Global 500, and what we found was that transformation is very rare. Only about 57 companies out of that list even had a credible transformation story. So we culled it down to that, and then we assessed those companies according to our primary metrics.
And we began to see something interesting. Many of the companies that had done this well had followed something that we call in our new book, dual transformation. That is, they're not doing a monolithic thing, they're doing two things together. What we call transformation A, repositioning today's business to make it more resilient. What we call then transformation B, creating tomorrow's business, pushing in new and different directions. Apple, I think, is a great example of this. As Steve Jobs came back to become the CEO of Apple in the late 90s, the first thing that he does is really consolidate the core portfolio, focus on operational discipline to give that engine as much life as possible. And of course, we know the rest of the story, the iPod and the iPhone and the iTunes and all the new services revenue that has grown so quickly for Apple. And this is a pattern that we saw for many of these companies that we studied.
Yeah, and another lesson that's really a takeaway from all these companies is that they developed a plan for transformation before disruption really set in. And you see that with a company like Aetna, which had a plan for the way healthcare was moving before the change really came about. Even Adobe, which had a plan for cloud computing before the disruption really ate away their business. The list of companies is pretty impressive, and we convened a panel of judges to assess the finalists, and Amazon and Netflix got the top scores. Our panel of judges included A.G. Lafley, Intuit's Scott Cook, and the finalist is pretty interesting, and we're going to talk about some of the other takeaway strategies.
Great. Well, you mentioned a really key one, that this isn't an accident. There's a clear strategy behind it. And what's interesting is the two companies that you mentioned as being tied for the leading companies are both companies that have really charismatic founders that have driven a lot of the strategy in the company. Of course, Jeff Bezos at Amazon and Reed Hastings at Netflix. This theme that the CEO and the strategy to transform come together persists in a lot of places as well. So Microsoft made our top 10 list. And you have a case here when Satya Nadella comes in as CEO, he has a pretty clear idea about what he wants to do to drive dual transformation at Microsoft, to begin to make the business more cloud-enabled in the core and move into new businesses in the new area. So you see this in a bunch of places where the CEO and strategy come as a package. I hope, Evan, that we don't just have tech companies on this list. I hope we've got a couple other companies as well.
No, look at Danone, which transformed from a food company to a nutrition company. And Emmanuel Faber had that vision when he came in as CEO, and they had been working on this vision for a while, but you see over the past 10 years, they've built it up to about 30% of their revenue. ThyssenKrupp is a German steel manufacturer that got into industrial services and solutions. They brought in a CEO from outside to their board of directors who was at Siemens beforehand. So they've diversified from just being a manufacturer to going into more digital services. So you can't really execute your strategy without that right culture. And a lot of these CEOs either established it as founders or came in and had to change the culture, like at Microsoft.
And it's something that you see repeated again and again. You probably heard the phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's even harder than that, of course. It's not just going and putting in beanbag chairs or having free food or whatever. It's working the underlying systems that are allocating assets and budgets and time and rewards and making sure that they allow you to move in a new direction. And as you're doing that, one of the other key things we see from all of these companies is they communicate. They communicate, they communicate. They make sure that they are persistent in getting this message out to all different levels of the organization. Mark Bertolini, the CEO of Aetna, told us that he thinks all the time about how he can communicate their transformation message and do it differently, because it will mean very different things if you're running a business unit versus you're somebody who's managing a call center. So he thinks about the importance of nailing that message throughout the entire organization.
That's right, and a lot of these CEOs tell us they're communicating their story all the time to their employees, to their customers, but also to Wall Street, to analysts. And a lot of times you think, okay, we have to keep our plan secret because of competitive reasons, but they're telegraphing it and telling people where they're going to go over a 5 to 10 year period. And the knock on Wall Street is, of course, they're looking at quarterly, but these are visionary leaders, and that's what we're celebrating here with the Transformation 10.
And I think as you hear some of these stories, you realize the flip side of the challenge of transformation. We started by saying this is the hardest challenge a leadership team will ever face. It's also the greatest opportunity a leadership team will ever encounter. Because when disruption reshapes the corporate landscape, that's when, if you're lagging, you become a leader. That's when you create huge new growth opportunities. That's when your business legacy is written.
That is great, and we invite you to Innosight.com to view the whole list and some of the takeaway lessons, and we hope to do it again in the future.